Member for Blain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise this morning to speak about this bill and more broadly on the issues of domestic violence. Madam Speaker, anyone who's grown up in the Territory is sadly all too familiar with the scene, the tragic scene of men beating women in public, at the shops, on the streets, outside schools, outside corner stores. It's sadly something that has become so common that many long-term Territorians have become desensitised to it. And I do remind those listening that there are mandatory reporting requirements around domestic violence, so if you do see it, please call the police and make a report. That's just so important. But it is sadly become part of life in the Territory, particularly under the former Labor government, that this scene was just so common. And particularly in my electorate of Blain, Madam Speaker, where I have many people staying in public housing, fleeing from domestic violence. And in Palmerston, we have a few safe houses where women who are fleeing domestic violence are able to go and be safe and secure from the perpetrators to get some respite. And I've met some of the workers in that space and I commend them. It's a very, very hard job. But they still turn up to work every day because they are committed to those women, those victim survivors, those children. I've spoken before in this House about my own experience with domestic violence, so I won't go over that again, but I have intimate knowledge of what it's like for children to grow up in a home where that is occurring and to see it happen in people that you know very well, friends and family members. And I'll credit to the member for 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙎. He's right, it is alcohol exacerbates, but there are underlying attitudes and behaviours that do need addressing there. But still, it cannot be tolerated. And this government will not tolerate domestic violence. So unlike those opposite who mischaracterised the member for Drysdale words, I would say men's strength is to protect and to provide. So I have 3 boys and I tell them as often as I can, because they are strong and the day will come when they'll be stronger than their mum. And the day will come when they'll be stronger than me, but that day has not yet arrived. And so I remind them regularly as they grow in strength, that strength is not to hurt, not to bully, not to harm. It is to protect and to provide for their loved ones and for those more vulnerable than them. It was said in this chamber in the last sittings that last week, that the only, and this was verbling one of the members on this side, that the only thing that could match violence, I can't quite remember the words, but it was the only thing that could go against violence was violence. But unfortunately, the situation we're in is, what do you call police? When you have a violent person who is threatening severe harm to those loved ones that are close to them or to members of the community, and we call the police, they don't use nice words. They start with nice words, but if there is no compliance, they will eventually have no choice but to take that person into custody against their will with the use of force. So violence, sadly, is a part of the discussion, but it is important that it is shaped and framed and used legitimately by those who are sworn to serve and protect society, and by men in society to protect and provide for their family and to keep them safe. I was there at the markets 2 dry seasons ago, when the member for Drysdale's family was surrounded by a group of juveniles engaging in what can only be described as a riot. And he swept up his family and formed a human shield with his own body to protect his wife and his 2 little girls. That is a demonstration of strength to protect his family. I'd like to now speak about the role of domestic violence orders. So I've had the dubious honour, the sadness, to know some people who have been on both sides of domestic violence orders. These are a key legal instrument to keep women safe when they reach the point where they realise that their loved one, the person who promised to love and cherish them, is causing so much harm to them that they have to go to the police and go to the courts in order to feel safe. Now, these domestic violence orders are an order of the court. Unfortunately, as has been well documented, if someone has so little regard for their loved one, so little regard for the court and police and the laws of society and good decency, that they are willing to breach that domestic violence order and go back and re-perpetrate harm against that loved one, there needs to be a strong response. There needs to be a circuit breaker. And very often, it is, Member for Johnston, I agree, when the legal system gets involved in a domestic dispute, there's often an increased risk of harm in the immediate aftermath. The person can be angry, upset, not thinking clearly, and wanting to lash out. And the person they will most want to lash out at is the person they blame for this domestic violence order, their partner. At this time, it is critically important that their partner is safe from them. Because if they breach that domestic violence order, the chances of them inflicting serious harm is increased many times. And I support this bill because I argue to this House that mandatory sentencing is an important and critical circuit breaker for women survivors in order to take the time, 7 days at least, hopefully, to get their affairs in order, to find a safe house. So the people that I've known who've gone through this, when they get a domestic violence order, that the planning that goes into their escape from their predicament, you would not believe. They're often tangled in all kinds of webs of financial control, physical control, coercive control. To escape from this scenario is a huge effort. And I take my hat off, I commend these women who plan for weeks, months, sometimes years to get out of these circumstances. And when they escape, their partner can be very, very angry and seeking to lash out. I've heard threats of them taking their guns and killing the woman, killing the children, and killing themselves. This is the sort of thing that women have to deal with when they come to the realisation that the person who promised to love and cherish them is now their greatest source of danger. And if they breach that DV, if they breach that domestic violence order, if we let them straight back out and they're now facing a charge over their heads and all kinds of consequences, and they've already found the woman because they're able to breach the domestic violence order against her, what do you think they're going to do? It is critical to put a circuit breaker in place, again, so that the woman has time to seek shelter, to seek a safe place to stay, to get her affairs in order, to move her things out. Just really basic logistics, getting out of that shared domestic home so that she can sleep comfortably at night and hopefully in a place where her abuser does not know where she is or the children. So I want to talk briefly about how we ended up in the position where this government is here restoring mandatory sentencing for domestic violence offenders or people who breach domestic violence orders. So the previous Labor government, I'll say, back in 2019, they had a pattern of watering down the laws to put the rights of offenders over the rights of victims. This was a pattern across many areas of legislation, many areas of law, and so I briefly want to speak about the point where they dipped their toe in the water. The Justice Legislation Amendment, Domestic and Family Violence Bill, Serial 113, that was debated on Thursday the 25th of June 2020. And I want to read out some comments that the now Chief Minister made at the time regarding that bill. She said at the time, and I'm reading from Hansard, I place firmly on the record, but we have strong concerns based on the feedback we received in the committee proceedings from Women's Legal Service about how this will operate, because it provides an alternative to mandatory sentencing without adequate safeguards that ought to go with such a change in position. Further down, in a nutshell, the components of the bill we are concerned about would allow a domestic violence offender to be bailed to a rehabilitative program and allow the court the discretion to deem completion of that program as an exceptional circumstance, potentially meaning the offender would not go on to undertake their sentence. Now, the member for 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙎 in his contribution today, I think, said that it takes, correct me if I'm wrong, you want 12 months. You need a significant amount of time in order for a men's behaviour change program to really take root in someone. Now my understanding, when I was campaigning, I was talking to police and they were saying that one of the programs that ended up getting implemented for this piece of legislation was a 16-hour course with Tangier, and the courts would consider that exceptional and then bail them. 16 weeks. 16 weeks? I was told 16 hours by police. I hope it was 16 weeks. So that was dipping their toe in the water about watering down mandatory sentencing for domestic violence offenders. Then in 2023, they went all the way with the Justice Legislation Amendment, Domestic and Family Violence Bill 2023, by the member for 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙎 when he was the Attorney General, perhaps the worst Attorney General in the history of the Northern Territory, as he oversaw the absolute destruction of our legal system, 𝙍𝙬𝙬, legal aid, neglect of our corrections system, shutting down the prison industries in corrections, and failing to invest for the growing prisoner numbers that he was aware of. So if it's better to release domestic violence offenders to rehab, then where were these rehab programs? So this morning, I had a quick look at today's court lists. Now, this is not an authoritative academic study. It's just a N=1 sample of today, but I think it's representative. So we had 101 domestic violence matters before the courts around the Northern Territory today. That's between Darwin, Alice Springs, communities, Katherine, Tennant Creek, all over the Northern Territory. 101. So that represents 101 domestic violence orders that are being considered by the courts today. There are 66 charges of engage in conduct that contravenes DVO before the courts today. 66 charges. That is a river of domestic violence offending that would require, even for 16 weeks, a huge amount of programs. And I'm not an expert in that area. I'll wait for the Minister for Domestic Violence in her response. She might have some more information on this matter. but I was not aware as a citizen of the Northern Territory of any kind of programs of that scale and nature that would protect or even function as a circuit breaker for women in the Northern Territory. Detention is not ideal. No one on this side is saying that detention is ideal. It is not. But it is essential to keep the community safe. It is essential to keep women safe. It is essential to keep children safe. It's better than what the previous government was doing for victims, which was nothing or next to nothing. This government is different. We will continue to put the rights of victims above those of offenders. We will continue to protect women and children, give them the time they need to seek shelter, move out of their circumstances, set themselves up for safety, engage in family safety frameworks, the programs that the police and the courts have in order to keep them safe. For that reason, I support this bill and I commend it to the House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.